So good morning, here we are in location. Now we're beside this river that runs through this beautiful Scottish glen, and it's still kind of overcast. It's about half an hour yet until the sun's supposed to rise, but there's some fresh snow on the hill. There's been a huge amount of rain recently, so the water's really rushing through here. So this is the first time Kristin and I have been here in 11 months. It was January was the last time. So I kind of know my way around here. I've been here quite a few times before. But yeah, just kind of excited to have a wide-angled lens on the camera. It's the first time in ages and ages. I mean, way back in the earlier part of the year. So we're going to really see what we can do here this morning. And I'm quite excited to kind of explore this area with a fresh pair of eyes 11 months after last being here. So yeah, we'll see what the day brings. And I'm sure we will come away with something that's going to make the whole thing worthwhile. So 1 second shutter speed for the sky, once you use a 6-stopper, becomes a minute. So that's a real neat little rule of thumb. So the first thing with shots like this is obviously we have quite an extreme dynamic range. Finding the composition here is really quite straightforward. The river flows through the scene, we've got rocks on either side. With the 12mm lens, I'm getting this tree up on the top right horizon there, and then the pointed peak is kind of in the middle. And what I'm trying to avoid is getting too much of an upslope on that left-hand side, because then it feels too massive on the sides. We want the focus to be right through the middle of the frame. So what I'm doing is I'm just experimenting with the dynamic range, and it's about 3 stops or 2 stops between an exposure for the river and the foreground and the rocks, and then for the sky. So currently I think I'm getting about 1 second for the sky, and maybe about 3 seconds for the river. Now, the biggest consideration here is to find the aesthetic shutter speeds that's going to suit the water and suit the sky. Now, the clouds are blowing over, kind of over my shoulder, and that is directionality. So if I use a longer exposure, I'm going to get streaking of the clouds moving towards the middle of the frame. Now, using long exposures to get streaky clouds is a great concept for feeling motion and flow, but it's the direction of them is so important. Here I suspect I've got a diagonal flow, which adds a dynamic element to the frame, which should complement the rest of the composition. So there's quite a few technical things to consider in this shot. Exposure, differences in exposure between foregrounds and skies, and then the different shutter speeds for the flow of the water and the flow of the clouds. And with the added fun that it's getting lighter every second, and once you've worked out your shutter speed for the sky, in 30 seconds time it will be different as the sun comes up. So there's a lot of juggling to be done, but it's a while since I've done any technical photography, so let's get stuck in.
I always come into these shoots with the best will in the world, and it's still impossible for me not to have degrees of expectation. Now, this is a photograph I took back in January, the last time we were at this location, and you know, I kind of like it. This is 12mm, taken a little bit later in the morning, so the shutter speed was much faster, and there was more light than when we got there the other day. And I like the kind of rushing sense of the water and the light and the colour palette. So when I took this second shot, which was the first shot I took with the 12mm lens this morning, you can see there are many differences. This is a 61-second exposure at f/16, and I've got the streaking of the clouds going across the sky there, but also the water here is totally smoothed out. There's no texture in it because it's a single exposure. Now, I think initially when I saw this on the back of the camera, it wasn't really what I was aiming for. And I think that kind of resulted in that sort of sense of slight disappointment, or the feeling that I wasn't very happy with the scene. Now I get it back into the computer, I do actually quite like it. I like the color palette. I like that kind of soft magenta, cool pre-dawn feel, little bits of pink here and there. It's a very moody image. One of the key components is the river was higher, so I was shooting this from further back, and I think that what that's done is made it a little bit more detached than perhaps the other version, and obviously the water being completely smoothed out has created a much more simple composition. So yeah, I wanted to kind of voice over this little section just because in hindsight, getting it back into the computer, it's actually an image I quite like.
So what's become immediately obvious is that the person I used to be with a 12mm prime, shooting big and wide and putting everything in the frame, he seems to be dead. So I very quickly come back now to a vertical 4x5, which feels to me much more classic, much more simple and confined. It's almost as if I want to distill the landscape into its key component parts. And if we look at that wide angle shot and compare it to this 4x5, what you can see here is a different relationship in scale between the rocks in the foreground and the mountain in the background. They seem way more harmonious. With the wide angled shot, the mountain and the rocks, which are the key part of the composition, are lost in this big mass of other stuff. If we got some more dramatic light and the sky was kicking off, maybe there could be an argument for that. Now, once I skip into the 4x5, I can carry on blending exposures, but blending is fiddly. This is why Luminar and Photoshop have got this sky drop-in feature now. The days of spending 2 hours making selections and then blending in different exposures, they're kind of in the past. And now with the power of Adobe Lightroom, we can make the grad line, because I'm using a 1.2 stop grad here, which is 4 stops, or a 1.2 ND, so it's a 4-stop soft graduated filter. So I'm darkening the sky by quite a lot to balance the foreground and the sky, and you can see the mountain there in the middle there is getting really dark. I can fix that so easy, so it's just easier for me to do it that way. I could probably drop it to a 3-stop. It's getting lighter all the time. There's a lot more reflected light going on. So I think I'm going to probably stick with a more classic 2470 type of composition and using the 4x5 aspect ratio. And I think I'll be a far happier photographer if I do that than forcing myself to use a 12mm prime just for your entertainment. So the light's developing really fast here. The sun's coming up behind me. This glen runs from east to west. A huge amount of that cloud is just burnt off and we've got mostly blue sky up top, but there are some very nice pinky clouds starting to frame the mountain. Now, the important thing is not to let technique rule creativity. If you use long exposures, so a minute, 30 seconds to get streaky clouds, the water suddenly gets really mushy and too abstract. We want, or aesthetically wise for me, I want the flow. I want to be able to see directionality. I don't just want to create a cauldron of madness. So I think it's very important to balance the technical side of shooting, especially once we've got these case filters on. It's very easy to stick a 6-stop filter on here and just do long exposures without any real thought as to the aesthetic outcome of that decision. So I'm back down to just using a 3-stop ND filter just to bring the sky down a little bit, which balances the exposure. So it's very simple shooting, and the rest we can just bring out in post. So yeah, kind of interesting to see what's going to happen with the light as it develops. There's certainly some very beautiful pinky clouds. I think I'll take a shot right now. And I'm right down now at half a second, which I think is good for the flow of the river. I've got my circular polarizer on, which is darkening that, polarizing that reflection of the surface. The clouds are looking great, and the histogram is looking great. I've got no clipped shadows, which means using my D850 I can lift the shadows, which will give me that nice, some of the nice detail in that mountain. If I wanted to bracket I could, but I know from past experience with the 850 I've got so much dynamic range I don't really need to. So I've begged and borrowed and grovelled, and I've managed to get hold of Krisin's 16-35, which is a lens I don't actually own anymore. And this is really where it's at. I'm shooting at, it's about 18mm, something like that. And what it's allowing me to do is to get the tree on the right hand side, to get a nice bit of the slope on the left hand side. The mountains, the pointy sisters are beautiful there in the middle. Now the shutter speed is 1/1.3, and that's just creating that perfect amount of flow to feel like the energy is rushing through that gorge and down into the canyon there. There's some very nice pink light. I'm still expecting the sun to come up, but yeah, I'm kind of where this is at now. 4x5, very classic, super Scottish. Yeah, I feel a Braveheart moment coming on. I think I just need to go and get my sword and rush down south of the border. So what makes the difference between one composition and another composition? And ultimately I think it's about feel. I've moved about a meter to the left, and what it's done is it's opened up the river canyon so that things are moving kind of continuously through the middle of the frame. When I was over there, it was a little bit of a zigzag, and bits of it were obscured, and it was a little bit less coherent. And really the bottom line is it's just feel. That's your only ally when it comes to composition, is understanding that feels better than that. And if you like it, that is what it's all about. But each of these photographs, they don't have to be the cover of National Geographic magazine. It's just purely exploring your relationship with the landscape. So all of that technical stuff is just a way of getting the data into the camera. It's how you are actually experiencing the landscape while you're here that's important. I'm having a blast. It's a beautiful place, it's a beautiful day, the light's developing, and I'm just exploring harmony and dissonance and balance and all of these different words that we use when we describe compositions. But this one has a very different feel to the one that was taken just a meter to my right. Not right or wrong, it's the consequences. It's that thing I talk about all the time. So it's been kind of an eventful morning. The light it kind of started to build, and I think we got the best of it with those pinky clouds there. The clouds come in again, and it's getting quite overcast, and I managed to kill a drone. I was just getting the B-roll drone footage and managed to fly it into a tree, and I've smashed the lens and broken the gimbal. So yeah, it's going to be a wee expensive morning, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to let that in its own right bother a very fine morning. And it's so important to remember that Kristin and I are fit and healthy, and we're out in the fresh air appreciating the beautiful Scottish countryside, engaging with the landscape in a meaningful way. So yeah, sometimes it's good to keep a perspective on those things. If you've enjoyed this video, please do me a favour and hit that thumbs up button. It's the one thing that probably helps us more than anything else. Of course, we love you to subscribe and get our notifications. But for this week, from this beautiful glen on the west coast of Scotland, have a great weekend, everyone. Bye for now.